Hello, everybody. 1 year ago at the same forum, I was honored to be part of this same panel talking about illicit finance. And at the end of that group presentations, we had time for a few questions. Hopefully we will this morning as well. The last question, we only had about 60 seconds to answer it, but the last question was, how are we doing collectively in our fight against international money laundering? And it was a very, very important question. As I said, I didn't have time to answer it. So that's what I want to talk about right now, because it's a very, very important question, and it affects everyone here in the room. Every single country here has incredible problems with transnational crime and the resultant illicit proceeds, the money being laundered. Every country in the world. So to answer that question, I first have to say, what is the magnitude of international money laundering? Well, Jerome just answered that. He said it was about $5 trillion a year, and that pretty much jives with other experts, what they say. The International Monetary Fund says it's roughly 2 to 5% of world GDP, which a few years ago was estimated about $100 trillion, so roughly $5 trillion. But of course, it's what's included in the count. Many believe that it's far greater than that. For example, tax evasion is a predicate offense or specified unlawful activities in many countries for money laundering. Underground financial systems are not necessarily always included in that. If you mix or commingle illicit monies with licit monies, capital flight could actually be a specified unlawful activity for money laundering. So it's in the 5 trillion plus area. So the question then is, well, how are we doing? I come from an intel and law enforcement background. There are two metrics that matter. We can talk about other metrics, but the two bottom line metrics that matter are, one, the amount of illegal proceeds that are actually seized and forfeited. And the second one is the amount of successful investigations, prosecutions, and convictions. So out of that approximately, say, $4 to $5 trillion that is laundered every year, or the proceeds of crime every year, according to the UN Office of Drugs and Crime, how much do we actually seize, not forfeit, but seize? It's less than $4 or $5 trillion annually. I'm going to repeat that. It's less than $4 to $5 trillion annually, or, I'm sorry, it's less than 40 billion annually worldwide out of the 4 trillion laundered. 40 billion annually out of the 4 trillion laundered. And that's just money that is seized, not necessarily forfeited. So the other metric that matters is how many are actually arrested and prosecuted for money laundering worldwide? Well, that's a very, very difficult question to answer because statistics of this nature vary widely from country to country, open to question. Sometimes others plead to other charges, other offenses. But the bottom line number, let's put it this way, the bottom line is for a money launderer to be caught and convicted, prosecuted and convicted, he or she has to be really, really stupid or really, really unlucky because the magnitude is so great. Now, I'm using US numbers because I know those numbers are out there for your countries, I'm sure. But for example, in 2023, the United States had the highest number of people sentenced for money laundering compared to any country in the world. We had about 1,132 cases in total. That seems like a high number, but if you look at the magnitude of that here in the United States, again, probably roughly $1 trillion a year or so, that's not very much at all. So then you have to look at what are the enforcement costs for all this, all right? So, for example, in 2024, there was a study of anti-money laundering compliance costs, primarily from financial institutions and money service businesses in the United States and Canada. $61 billion. $61 billion. That's what industries cost. Now, of course, there are other countries, other regions of the world, multiply that additional tens and tens and tens of billions of dollars. And it's almost impossible to calculate the costs from governments around the world at the federal, national, regional, state, metropolitan levels. Costs for such things as investigations and prosecutions and financial intelligence units and regulations and anti-money laundering compliance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Additional multi-tens of billions of dollars a year. And remember, it's about 40 billion or so, if we're lucky, what we actually get back from seizures and forfeitures. Well, some people say, well, all this is mitigated by the amount of fines and penalties for anti-money laundering compliance. But in reality, those two are often minimal. In the United States, we have more fines and penalties against major banks and money service businesses than any other country in the world. It's generally about $2 to $3 billion a year. We just had a very large fine against, TD Bank? That's about $3 billion a year. That's a lot, but it pales in significance to the other numbers that I was talking about. In other words, the situation is really, really bad. It's so bad, Raymond Baker, a longtime financial crime expert and the founding father of global financial integrity, I'm the board of GFI, it's a nonprofit here in Washington, D.C., Raymond said a number of years ago, talking about anti-money laundering, that quote unquote total failure is just a decimal point away. Total failure is just a decimal point away. Now, most of you are parliamentarians. What should really concern you is a statement from Ron Paul. He's a very distinguished anti-money laundering expert from New Zealand. He writes, quote, anti-money laundering legislation is the least effective of any anti-crime measure anywhere. Again, looking at these metrics that matter. Now, the reasons for these difficulties, these failures are many. I've been looking at this for about 30 years. I'm going to give you my top 10 reasons. There are plenty of others, and I know my friends and colleagues here could add additional ones. Number one, the reason why it's so difficult is the magnitude of the problem is just so high. We talked about that. Number two, our anti-money laundering safeguards, primarily put in place by the Financial Action Task Force, were designed back in the 1980s, where large amounts of dirty money were sloshing around through Western financial institutions during the era of the cocaine cowboys. Our anti-money laundering efforts have kind of been slow to catch up. Number three, we're slow to recognize changing threats. For example, in years past at this forum, I've also talked about the growing threat from what I call CCP Inc., China, and its growing role in transnational crime and money laundering. Other experts have talked about this today. It's a tremendous problem, but we're not doing too much about it. By the way, speaking of China, I firmly believe that this is where communist China is most vulnerable because of their involvement in transnational crime and money laundering. Four, there's a dearth of skilled anti-money laundering enforcement. In other words, there's just a lack of capacity and expertise. Five, we've got tremendous difficulties from an enforcement standpoint with issues such as venue and jurisdiction. Six, criminals are attracted to weak links, i.e. those countries with weak rule of law or those that are havens for criminality or don't cooperate with international investigations, like China. Seven, despite the massive amounts of money we put on anti-money laundering measures, we still don't have enough. Jerome was just talking about how FIUs need more funding. Over the years, we have made tremendous progress in putting together anti-money laundering infrastructures around the world, passing new laws, rules, and regulations. But to me, from my perspective, what's still missing is beneficial ownership information that is transparent. 9, corruption. Corruption. I spent a lot of my career in the developing world helping countries put together anti-money laundering and counterterrorism finance measures, and they were always challenged by the internal corruption. We got too close to ruling families or powerful interests. It hurts me to say that I see that happening in my own country right now. And then finally, lack of political will. Not in all countries, of course, but certain countries, their heart's just not in it. Now, some people, and we're going to talk about this later on, think, well, there's a silver bullet out there. We have so many problems, but there's some magic formula, some silver bullet. We use that expression in the States, some magic cure-all. And they always talk about technology, advanced analytics, central bank digital currencies. That's going to solve the problem. It will be able to help finally follow those the money trails. We'll see. We're going to talk about that later on this afternoon, and I look forward to those conversations. But my bottom line is, again, having done this for so many years, if you really are serious about if you're really serious about addressing this issue, put your resources into enforcement, because that's what it all comes down to. You can have 175 financial intelligence units around the world. You can have all these financial intelligence reports filed. You can do this, you can do that, but it still comes down to the investigator that has to take the lead and has to work the streets or has to work the ports. There's no shortcuts for it. We just need more resources in enforcement. So thank you very much.